Our adventure begins in the eyes, or rather the optical sensors, of a cybernetic ninja called a Ghostrunner who wastes no time getting the show on the road and promptly kills a man minding his own business before I as the player can even press a single button. I'm not sure where we are or when we are, but a mysterious disembodied voice titled Whisper, the first of a great many disembodied voices, expresses surprise that our hero is quote-unquote alive and quite reasonably tells him to relax a bit. The Whisper says that he's stuck in prison and isn't able to help our hero until he gets broken out of it, so away we go to help our new friend. As the Ghostrunner moves through the derelict city, the Whisper tells him that the uprising is no more and the Keymaster was victorious, whatever that means. The location is sprawling and enormous, and an intercom alerts nearby enemies to the Ghostrunner's presence, but he's more than up to the task of dealing with a few mooks. The Ghostrunner is alarmingly fast, agile, and dexterous. He's able to run on walls, slide, and use his sword with alarming efficiency. What he is not, however, is durable, as a single shot from an enemy will kill him immediately. Regardless, as the Ghostrunner keeps moving, the Whisper tells him that he's able to remotely access his inner workings and even gives him a nifty new sensory boost, granting the Ghostrunner vastly heightened reflexes. Over on some pipes, the Ghostrunner discovers a small artifact, a butterfly knife with a description saying that as the base became more unstable under the Keymaster's rule, more and more people had to carry personal weapons on them to stay safe. I think it's fair to say this place is dealing with that bit of socio-economic trouble inherent to all cyberpunk settings, and as the Whisper is about to mention something about the sewer systems, his transmission suddenly gets jammed, and he exclaims that he can hear guards trying to breach the door to his prison cell. A voice telling tenants to remain indoors is broadcasted over the intercom, saying that any citizens outside their homes will be treated as part of the rebel uprising. And once the Ghostrunner eliminates all the guards with lockdown chips and their cybernetic implants, he is then able to take an elevator to an upper level, where the Whisper says again that he can't hold out much longer. As the Ghostrunner gets closer to the prison tower where Whisper is being held, he finds another artifact, a propaganda poster showing a picture of a smiling man with cybernetic implants, with a description that talks of the Keymaster's failure to deliver on her promise of a better life for the city's residents even after 20 years. At this point, the guards are just a few moments away from breaching Whisper's cell, but once the Ghostrunner eliminates them, Whisper lets him inside. The strange cell is enormous, and it doesn't take long to realize that it wasn't made to hold a person, and when the Ghostrunner finally frees Whisper, something very interesting happens. Whisper directly interfaces with the Ghostrunner's computer systems and brings him into an entirely new digital world he calls the Cyber Void. Whisper explains that the Cyber Void is designed to allow the Ghostrunner to calibrate his forgotten abilities, saying that time moves slower here and that in the Cyber Void the Ghostrunner is even able to speak. Learning of his newfound voice, the Ghostrunner skeptically asks Whisper, "Who exactly are you?" and when Whisper responds by saying he can call him the Architect, the Ghostrunner then asks, "Who am I?" The Architect responds by saying he is the 74th Ghostrunner, a type of specially designed robotic peacekeeper, but that they don't have much time and they need to keep moving. As the Ghostrunner makes his way through the Cyber Void, he tells the Architect that he remembers a fight and a fall and that there were others like him. The Architect explains that the two of them were cast down from Dharma City into the base district after a particularly violent coup d'etat led by a cyborg named Mara, who now acts as the city's reigning Keymaster. Apparently, it's been 2 whole decades since then, and the once human Architect who created the Ghostrunners was killed by Mara in the coup, but luckily he was able to create a backup of his brain in the special AI unit that he's now using to assist and talk to the Ghostrunner. The Architect then explains that the world they now find themselves in is actually not technically just a city, but a colossal megastructure known as Dharma Tower, once protected by the Nightly Legion of Ghostrunners and home to millions of people, but Mara had her own plan and seized control, resulting in the neglected dystopia we see it as now. The Ghostrunner, distracted from the history lesson, rather humorously asks why he's still being made to run around and jump on stuff if this Cyber Void place is created and controlled solely by the Architect. The Architect answers by saying it's like this so the Ghostrunner can essentially practice and recalibrate his systems, explaining that he was subjected to shoddy repairs by an inexperienced group of rebels called the Climbers. The Ghostrunner asks what happened to the climbers, and the architect responds that they're all dead now. Mara and her soldiers killed them, to which the Ghostrunner asks how was Mara able to gain control in the first place. The architect explains that he was literally stabbed in the back. Mara was once his lover and the two oversaw Dharma Tower together, but now she's changed and became an enemy and a tyrant. The Ghostrunner says he still wants more answers, and the architect says he will get them, but right now all that's important is that they defeat Mara. Exiting the cyber void, the architect says that now they should find the cyber void mainframe, which should contain additional data that can be used to calibrate the Ghostrunner's abilities further. Interestingly, the Ghostrunner seems to harbor a small degree of mistrust for the architect, but pushes upwards anyway, while the architect says they need to get out of the base district since Mara's soldiers are around every corner after the climbers' recent failed uprising. The Ghostrunner asks how the architect can help him, to which the architect explains that the cyber void is the only medium he has any modicum of control over, but even still, he's the Ghostrunner's best shot at making it out of this place alive. When the Ghostrunner finds himself in what appears to be some type of large refinery, he hears a new voice come over his radio. A woman named Zoe Avila is sending a distress signal saying that she's one of the last surviving members of the climbers, to which the Ghostrunner frustratedly berates the architect since he said they were all dead. The architect says that one single desperate survivor is of no use to their mission and instructs the Ghostrunner to just keep moving, warning of more of Mara's soldiers making their way into the area. Exploring the facility, the Ghostrunner finds an audio log made by the once human architect. As a human, the architect was named Adam, and in this log he spouts strange abstract poetry and talks of the new generation missing out on the quote-unquote good times. Continuing on, the Ghostrunner hears Zoe on the radio again, and ignoring the architect's recommendations, responds to her cries for help. Surprisingly, Zoe actually recognizes him as Jack, the old Ghostrunner they were trying to repair for months, who they were never able to actually wake up. She mournfully wishes that he were there during the recent attack since things would have gone differently, and asks what he's planning to do now. The Ghostrunner, who I will now refer to from this point on as Jack, simply says he's going up to kill the Keymaster, and Zoe responds with some slightly hesitant encouragement and offers her assistance in acting as a guide for him. The architect, who's been silent up until this point, pipes up to ask Jack why he's even bothering talking to Zoe if he already has his help, and Jack says that they fixed him so he's gonna pay them back. The architect says they did a pretty bad job of it and he was only waiting to fully activate Jack when they actually finished his repairs, but since Mara cut their time short, he had to activate him in his current unoptimized state. Jack logically asks why the architect didn't just contact the climbers and help them, and the architect responds by cynically saying they never had a chance anyway. After navigating through a particularly dangerous series of OSHA violations, Jack finds another artifact, an earring made out of a hood ornament with a description that makes reference to an unknown cataclysmic event called the Burst, which caused the vast majority of motor vehicles to fall into disuse, resulting in their parts getting reused in all sorts of unusual ways, as we can see with this earring. Arriving at the top of the sector, Jack reaches the cyber void mainframe the architect was talking about and jumps inside to perform some bug fixes. He's not very excited about being back in the cyber void, but the architect assures him that it's entirely necessary if they want to be victorious over Mara. While Jack is being made to play Tetris, the architect gives a subtle hint that suggests Jack is not entirely just an inorganic robot and may at one point of time have been at least partly human. After completing the puzzle, the architect gives Jack a new combat ability and guides him through its usage, and upon Jack demonstrating his proficiency with it, allows him to exit the cyber void back into the real world. When the architect tells Jack to clean up any remaining key guards, Jack humorously says he's not in the mood and he'll just go past them, but the architect says they can't be allowed access to the cyber void terminal because he can't exist without the cyber void and Jack can't exist without him. Jack kills the remaining guards, who the architect explains aren't even real soldiers and are instead just thugs contracted by Mara to do her bidding, suggesting that in its current state, Dharma Tower doesn't even seem to have any real form of unified military. Continuing upwards, next to the body of a key guard with very unusual fashion sense, Jack finds another artifact, a can of coffee with a description that talks of its rarity, but more importantly mentions the very same burst event that the earring artifact talked about. The architect says their next stop is Dharma City, and the easiest way to get there is to use the Amida elevator station. On the way out, the architect muses on the history of Dharma Tower and the base district, the lowest level of the tower, and how it used to be its industrial foundation, but now it only contains old warehouses and gang hideouts. He also says that he built it as a safe haven for humanity after the apocalypse, a revealing line that's most likely in reference to the burst event mentioned previously. Eventually, Jack arrives at another lift that takes him higher up the tower into the sector's main factory complex. It's here where he meets a new type of enemy, a key guard with a more powerful rifle than the standard guard's pistols, suggesting that as Jack moves higher up the tower, the keys will become more well-equipped and formidable. Jack hears Zoe over the radio again and asks a pretty interesting question about why they decided to call him that. Zoe explains that it's just a code name that they used for him during the repairs, and Jack says that he likes the name. She says she's got all her gear ready to assist Jack remotely, mentioning her Atma chip, a neural implant that does I don't know, and apparently Jack doesn't really understand it either, but it does some kind of sci-fi stuff that basically lets her see out of his eyes. Over behind a pile of junk, Jack finds another artifact, a discarded cybernetic arm that once belonged to a worker of the base district, with a description that talks of its intended utility of increasing strength and stamina, but ultimately the whole initiative behind giving workers these arms was abandoned due to high production costs. As Jack presses on, Zoe says that things have changed here since he was gone, and the architect mentions that in the past, Jack had visited the base before to deal with criminals and bandits, but then Mara took over and gave them all jobs instead of prison sentences. Zoe explains that the entire factory system down here is almost completely automated, and all the product just goes straight up to Dharma City, where Mara and her lackeys sit on their asses reaping the benefits, blah blah blah, cyberpunk, fight the power. Alright, let's keep things moving here. The architect interjects to make an interesting point, however, that suggests the very air on Earth is no longer breathable by human beings, explaining that Dharma Tower has special hydroponic farms that produce plants and oxygen. But they are beginning to slowly fail, which means that soon nobody's going to be living lavish because nobody's going to be living at all. Zoe divulges a little bit more about herself, picking up on the fact that Jack doesn't seem to remember a whole lot since before he was activated, and reminisces about the sacrifices made by her parents, her friends, and some guy named Saul, saying that she and her compatriots remembered a time before the Keymaster. Jack curiously asks why Mara calls herself that, and Zoe says it's a metaphor for her setting them free, to which Jack adds quote-unquote free from the architect. Over behind some crates and barrels, Jack finds a rather unique artifact, a special token used by members of the Climbers Rebellion to identify allies, with a description that talks of the slow growth of the movement from its inception as a small gang to an actual rebellion. And after fighting a rather sizable group of keys, Jack finds yet another artifact, a pair of syringes containing a drug called Shank, with a description that explains its creation is a careful balancing act of giving the best experience while making sure the user doesn't die. Zoe ominously mentions that the keys are changing course, but she's not sure what exactly they're up to. The architect again sneers at Jack for accepting Zoe's help, saying she's out of her depth, but Jack doesn't care and stoically continues upwards towards the elevator station. Suddenly, Zoe says she's intercepted the key's order transmissions, and they're being commanded to disable the base district's air filters, which she explains will allow toxic dust from the outside to enter the tower and suffocate thousands of innocent people in the lower levels. Jack tells Zoe to point him in the direction of the air filters, and she sends him on his way. As he's heading over there, the architect interjects again to complain, saying that only one sector will be affected and that their population is dwindling anyway. Jack ignores him and asks Zoe why Mara is even doing this, and Zoe answers that she's punishing the base district's 5th sector for rebelling as an example for the other sectors. Jack soon finds a cyber void uplink, which the architect explains is a special type of inhibitor that disables his built-in safety measures, allowing him to move so fast that time appears to slow down, but only for a short while so he doesn't damage himself. After using one to get past a giant fan, Jack finds another artifact, a cheap projector used by dedicated members of the Keymaster Guard who sometimes try to create propaganda throughout the base district. And in the next area, Jack finds one more artifact, an exam guide that once belonged to a resident of the 5th sector. The description explains that if someone from the lower levels of the tower wanted to move up to Dharma City, they would have to take a special exam before they could become a citizen there. Continuing towards the big fan that Zoe is guiding him to, Jack finds yet another artifact, a homemade bomb insinuated by the description to have been created by the climbers. Now we're getting really cyberpunky, woohoo. Gently tucking the bomb into his pocket with the prosthetic arm, butterfly knife, and hood ornament, Jack keeps moving and hears the architect come on over the radio to mention that there's no reason for Jack to be doing this and he's getting sidetracked trying to help Zoe in the 5th sector out. Jack just ignores him again and continues his search for cool little trinkets, eventually finding another one in a large ventilation duct, a withered but surviving lemon plant with a description that explains residents of the base district try to grow their own food whenever possible in order to get as much food as they can. Continuing on, Zoe warns Jack that there are still keys everywhere, and Jack rationally asks that shouldn't they die as well, to which Zoe responds that either they have breathing gear or they just don't know what's going on. Zoe says she's still trying to contact the other climbers to get help, but nobody is responding, so she hopes that maybe they're just laying low. The architect butts in to say that they are most definitely laying low because they are all literally lying on the floor dead. After a fan sends him flying in the air, Jack finds another audio log created by the architect when he was still the human Adam, pondering his old age and talking of how Mara's gene therapies has let him live to the ripe old age of 95, and the log ends with him reciting some more poetry on the nature of mortality and depressingly wishing himself a happy birthday. Tucked away on a secluded series of pipes in a large room, Jack finds another artifact, a stolen gun with a description that reads the only real way to obtain a firearm in the base district is to either become a key or steal one from a key. Just then, an announcement over the tower loudspeaker proclaims that the filtration system is fully offline and contamination is imminent. The architect tells Jack to get out of there before it turns deadly, but Jack doesn't breathe, so he ignores him again. An evacuation order goes out and Jack starts moving quicker while the architect starts talking about how the people are weak and they need someone to lead them, not the other way around. Geez, dude, there's not going to be anybody left to lead if they're all dead. Jack, sounding like an actual bit of distress is coming over him, says that his memory isn't coming back, to which the architect says that it doesn't need to and that he will tell Jack what to do from now on. As Jack continues to ignore him and move towards where Zoe wants him to go, the architect relents on trying to get him to stop and explains that the burst ruined the Earth's atmosphere, so when he designed Dharma Tower, the filtration systems were made to be as durable as possible. Moving through a large fan, the architect tells Jack to slow down, and Jack soon comes face to face with a new enemy, a special type of key guardsman referred to in the game files as a Frogger, so that's the name I'm gonna go with, who attacks with an enormous cybernetic arm by leaping through the air and smashing down at his target. The architect reiterates that Jack's opponents will become stronger as he ascends the tower, since Mara only saves her best equipment for her most trusted soldiers. Jack keeps moving to the filtration controls and tells the panicking Zoe over the radio to be patient, he's almost there. After fighting through a sizable group of keys, Jack finally arrives at the controls and realizes that it's actually a cyber void interface. The architect confirms this and says again that this whole thing is a waste of time, but again Jack ignores him and hops on in. As Jack solves the puzzle in the cyber void filtration controls, he trades some shots with the architect, mentioning how he controls all of the cyber void but Jack still has to do all the work, to which the architect counters by saying that there's some kind of barrier between them and he's helping Jack more than he knows. Once Jack switches the filtration system back on, the architect sarcastically thanks him for saving the day, and then Zoe genuinely thanks him for saving the day. Zoe expresses her gratitude again by saying she's very happy they were able to find him when they did, but also solemnly says again that she wishes he were there when the climbers were defeated. She also lets slip that Jack isn't the only Ghostrunner unaccounted for, which means there might still be others out there that Mara wasn't able to deactivate. Soon afterwards, Jack finds another artifact, a rebreather likely once used by a laborer in the base district, with a description that explains how the hazardous conditions of living in the lower levels of Dharma Tower basically require all residents there to wear some kind of breathing apparatus to stay alive. As Jack fights through more keys, Zoe talks about the attack on the climbers and how she got separated, and the architect interjects to almost compliment Mara on her ability to subjugate them, saying that she must have learned a thing or two from him over the years. What the aren't you supposed to save the supervillain talk for the end when we actually fight you, bro? Anyway, as Jack annihilates more and more keys, Zoe mentions that what he's fighting now are the rear guard, and the main contingent of Mara's paramilitary has already boarded the elevators to return to the upper levels, saying that Jack doesn't need to kill them if he doesn't want to. Jack says that's not a problem, and Zoe just says she's glad he's on her side. Zoe is worried that Mara will send in more troops to deal with the base districts later, but Jack says Mara will be long dead by then, and finally arrives at the lift that will take him to an upper level. Ascending further upward to the elevator station, Jack steps out of the lift and meets another new enemy, a taller, more burly key called a shielder that uses a large barrier to defend himself from the front, making the only way to kill him being getting around behind him. Right after defeating the shielder, Jack finds another artifact on a ledge, and this time it's far more interesting than an exam guide or a lemon plant. It's an old poster showing a picture of a Ghostrunner made to introduce residents of Dharma Tower to their new robot protectors, with a description that explains their purpose as peacekeepers and loyal servants of the architect. In the next room, Jack finds another artifact, a credit card with a description that explains when the gates of the tower closed, the world economy shifted away from money to more primitive methods, with credit cards being used not as credit cards but instead like basic bartering chips. And a few rooms later, Jack finds another artifact, a bronze sculpture of the architect's head with a description that talks of the strange tendency for residents of Dharma Tower to worship him and his wife as models of human perfection. Talk to him on the phone for 5 minutes and that song will change tune, I guarantee you. Jack eliminates some more keys for a few minutes, but eventually comes upon a large spinning gear that the architect says he's able to manipulate with his sci-fi ninja robot powers. The architect also says that the motors in these facilities were designed to be used in tandem with Atma neural chips, which enabled base engineers to control the machinery with their thoughts. He also tells Jack again that he needs to hurry to Amida Station and they can't give Mara any time to prepare, but Jack says she's already got 20 years on them, so what difference does it make? In a rare instance of the architect actually sounding altruistic for once, he mentions that it's not about what Mara can do to him and Jack, it's about what she can do to everybody else in the meantime. Jack is still rightly skeptical considering the whole air filter situation, but continues anyway as Zoe comes over the radio to say that a system lockdown's been initiated at the elevator station, but won't be in full effect until all the elevators get to the upper station. She tells Jack to get to the control room fast, and the architect says that boy, they could really use some help right now, but the climbers picked a great time to up and die for their cause. Jack questions the strange hostility the architect has towards the climbers, pointing out that they both have the same ultimate goal, but the architect makes the distinction that the climbers cared about their families while he cares about the species. Okay, you know what it is? This guy got lost on his way to r/atheism. In the next room, Jack finds a new uplink ability, one that allows him to materialize throwing stars from pure cyber void essence that he can throw infinitely for a brief period of time. Just then, Zoe comes over the radio again to say that she's hacked into the Keys communication mainframe computer whatever and actually changed their orders to tell them to stop boarding the elevators and stay put for a bit, which was pretty smart, and buys Jack some more time as he keeps heading to the control room. Jack continues moving, killing Keys every step of the way, and eventually finds a new artifact, an insignia of the Hammers gang with a description that seems to suggest the climbers may not be the freedom-fighting revolutionaries they claim to be and are instead just like any of the other gangs down here. In a rare instance of him actually initiating a conversation instead of just grunting at the end of it, Jack mentions to Zoe that Keys also have these special Atma brain chips and asks her if they can be hacked. Zoe says she doesn't think so, and the architect says, well, not by her. Oh my god, Jack, will you hang up on this dude already? Guys, in case I didn't make it clear, Zoe and the architect can't hear each other, so it's not like a conference call or anything. It's like this weird kind of angel and devil on his shoulders type of deal going on. Everybody stays quiet for a bit while Jack rushes to the control room, and eventually he arrives at the elevator station Cyber Void terminal. Entering the Cyber Void Void, Jack is met with a series of complicated mazes that he complains to the architect about, and the architect says that these impossible mazes are precisely what's kept him safe for the last 20 years. He tells Jack to cheer up and that if he were a human, the cyber void would be even more confusing to him. Soon after he solves a few mazes, the architect says he's found something interesting in the elevator's security scan memory, which he explains indicates one of Jack's brothers, or maybe Jack himself, must have used the elevator right before Mara's insurgents disabled the internal security. After solving all the maze puzzles, Jack finds himself in a very unusual setting within the cyber void. The abstract walls and grounds of code that make up the typical cyber void environment have morphed to form structures, buildings, and plants that resemble the ones you'd see in feudal Japan. Jack learns another new ability here called Tempest, a simple ability that allows him to channel pure cyber void energy into his palm to holy moly, he's got the force now, that's freaking awesome! The architect explains that it works by rapid micro vibrations of Jack's inner hydraulics, creating immense amounts of pressure that when shifted results in a concentrated blast. He also says that he hopes Jack's cruddy climber-made prosthetic arm can handle it, and says its primary application when he designed the ability was for crowd control. Ghostrunners would use Tempest as a non-lethal means of restraining large groups of unruly people. Wow, I feel kinda bad for whining about him earlier. The architect gave Ghostrunners the freaking force, so that's definitely one of Jack's cooler abilities I'll be using any chance I get. Exiting the cyber void, Zoe says to Jack that they now have control of the terminal and the keys are gone, which means they can finally go use the elevators to get up to Dharma City. In one of the rooms full of giant conveyor belts, Jack finds another artifact, a food ration with a description that explains how provisions at the base of Dharma Tower are extremely limited, so most of the economy relies on contraband and black markets, since only factory workers and miners get these food rations. A little bit later, Jack also finds another audio log, which yet again contains the voice of Adam, this time when he was about halfway through with the Ghostrunner project, ruminating on his mortality and wondering about how he can make sure everything goes according to plan if his living body won't be around to see it. The log ends with him realizing that he can apply the technology he's been using to create the Ghostrunners to try and engineer a neural network that can theoretically keep his brain alive indefinitely, and judging by the fact that he's been talking in Jack's ear for the past hour and a half, his plan definitely worked out. Jack asks if there are any security measures in the elevators, but Zoe says she doesn't know since only keys are allowed to use them and not civilians. Well, she clarifies that civilians can technically go on the elevators if they're prisoners, even if their only crime was getting caught. Cyberpunk. Soon, Jack runs into another new enemy, and this time it's not a key, but instead a large bipedal robot called a waver, which as the name suggests, shoots out a large wave of energy that needs to be jumped over or slid under to be avoided. As Jack keeps moving to the elevator, the architect mentions that even before Mara's coup, they were rarely used, since at that point many of the people living in the base district had all their needs fulfilled right at their own layer of the tower. Zoe then ominously says that something big is coming, but she doesn't know what it is. I'll tell you what it is. It's Tom. The T-073M Laser Defense Array, or TOM for short, is the first quote-unquote boss of Ghostrunner, even though it's really more of an entire level within itself. From my understanding, TOM is basically a giant security turret thing that's been sort of plopped into one of the Amida elevator shafts itself, so there's no getting up to Dharma City without taking care of this thing. The architect says he wasn't aware Mara was able to get it back online, Zoe is beside herself and says she's never seen anything like it before, and Jack is as stoic as ever and gets right to work. The architect tells Jack to try and reach the top of Tom since it has support cables up there that can be attacked to bring it down. Zoe tells Jack to turn back, but he's got infinite lives, so he starts climbing, and it actually doesn't take very long to reach the first support cable. However, when Jack attacks it, he lets out a sharp scream of pain due to the energy surge, and he falls back down deeper into the shaft along with Tom. The architect tells him to climb back up and explains that Toms were placed in each elevator station so that nobody could enter enter Dharma City without his approval. Jack questions the architect, wondering why he would be expecting any kind of uprising, and the architect responds saying he was just being prepared. As Jack continues to climb back up to the other support cable, Zoe remarks on just how much the keys really don't want him to get to Dharma City, and the intercom spouts juxtaposing pleasantries saying it hopes Jack enjoys his trip. Jack eventually arrives at the other support cable and slashes it, and it really takes a lot out of him again, but at this point Tom is on its last legs and all that remains is the little laser core thingy that was at the top. The architect says Tom was built to last, and after Jack destroys each of its remaining power cells and its central core, CPU, machine brain, whatever, Tom is finally eliminated and Jack can proceed. The architect says he knew Jack could do it, and Zoe shares a little too much information, but also says she's going to send Jack to a maintenance floor of Dharma City that should have minimal key presence. After another quick elevator ride, Jack finally arrives at Dharma City. If you like the rainy, dark environments, the pink and blue neon lights, and the dystopian advertisements and propaganda posters of traditional cyberpunk settings, you're in luck because this place is exactly what you've been waiting for. If you're not into any of that stuff, well, honestly, I don't even know how you made it this far. Zoe is impressed by the city, saying that she's never actually been up here before, and the architect explains that Mara very strictly controls the flow of resources and personnel to and from the base district. Even though there's still no shortage of keys up here, Zoe tells Jack that he left the vast majority of them behind in Amida Station, and in a rare display of gratitude, Jack tells her thanks in a nice little moment that actually leaves Zoe a little surprised. It's here in the city where Jack meets another new enemy, a flying platform drone that he can land on top of and jam his sword into to fly around. It's quite a bit of fun, and they can be used to get to new areas or even kill other enemies. The architect says their next stop is the repository, a data archive containing information about the world before the burst, which should hold some documentation on Project Ghostrunner, since if you remember, the architect still thinks Jack needs a few more upgrades before he can actually face Mara. He also tells Jack to stop relying on Zoe, but Jack tells him he only relies on himself. Oh, come on, Jack, don't you start with that. Jack soon finds a new uplink ability, one that allows him to jump much higher than usual, and he uses it to find a very important artifact, a newspaper chock full of juicy lore and world building. The headline of the September 26, 2156 New York Update article, the last ever printed, reads as follows: Space Tycoon off the rails, Adam Hamada's imaginary apocalypse. The newspaper was printed the very same day the burst happened, and the article itself reads as follows. Adam Hamada, aged 58, the most notorious billionaire of our time, has reached a new level of paranoia. During the press conference held at Samsara Corporation's headquarters last night, the eccentric CEO and majority shareholder made a shocking announcement. According to his words, the Dharma Tower project, scheduled to be completed next week, is, just as part of the general public most inclined to tinfoil hats predicted, a gigantic shelter meant to protect tens or even hundreds of thousands of people from an astronomical event that is supposed to threaten our planet in the upcoming months. Wow, this is great world building and exactly what I was waiting for. See, Ghostrunner can be pretty interesting when it moves away from all these tired old cyberpunk tropes and goes for something more unique. I especially like how the burst is not just a euphemism for a nuclear war like I thought it was up until this point. Instead, something from outer space came and destroyed the world. Soon, Jack finds another artifact, an adorable little teddy bear with a morbid description that explains it was likely brought to Dharma Tower during the refugee influx the day of the burst, saying that kids who only lost their toys were the lucky ones. Well, great, that just killed the whole mood. As Jack keeps moving through the city, taking zip lines from rooftop to rooftop, he asks Zoe where all the civilians are, and she surmises there's a curfew in effect, and the people up here must be just as oppressed as the people in the base district. Incidentally, a citywide lockdown announcement rings out warning citizens to stay inside due to an armed and dangerous criminal being spotted in the area, and anyone who leaves their homes will be shot on sight. Jeez. Eventually, Jack finds another interesting artifact, a Samsara Corporation employee ID belonging to a woman named Karen Tyrell, with a description that explains the Samsara Corporation started out as a mining company in the 1800s but eventually became mankind's finance final shelter on Earth. What's interesting here is that the logo on the employee ID is the same as the insignia on the climber's token. Jack asks Zoe over the radio what her plan was with Dharma City, and Zoe says that she and her climber buddies were planning on attacking it, but they wanted to wait until Jack woke up so that he could lead them to victory and quote-unquote avenge the architect. And you can imagine the sarcastic response Mr. Hamada had to that little tribute. Jack, why don't you just conference them and then Zoe can hear what a colossal this guy is. As Jack hacks some billboards to create a path for himself, Zoe asks him what his plan is to defeat Mara, since the last time he faced her he had all his Ghostrunner brothers backing him up and it still didn't work out too well. Jack asks her how she even knows that, and Zoe says that her father told her, and everybody knows the tale of the heroic Ghostrunners sacrificing themselves to try and stop Mara. Jack never really gives an answer to her question though, but I'm assuming he's hoping that after 20 years Mara's remote control with the Ghostrunner killer button has run out of battery. The architect explains that Jack was one of the very few Ghostrunners who wasn't as badly affected by the initial deactivation signal, saying that Jack has some special variations in his design, but it didn't really matter in the end. Zoe reiterates her question to Jack, asking if he really thinks he can take on Mara alone, and Jack says no, but he still keeps moving. They go back and forth for a little bit about how much they hate Mara and she's so evil, but eventually Jack finds another artifact, a disc for an old top-down shooter game called Killer Priest 3000, with a description that explains it was a cult classic very popular amongst hardcore gamers before the burst, but there's no way to play it now. Just before Jack steps into the lift to take him to a higher level of the city, the architect ruminates on the current state of Dharma and how much it's gone to ruin, and for once I agree with the guy. Only human beings could turn a place with cybernetic arms and flying robots into a dump like this. After ascending in the elevator, Jack steps out and meets a new, much more formidable enemy who mirrors his own technique, speed, weapon choice, and possibly unhealthy obsession with antiquated Japanese culture, a key swordmaster referred to in the game files as a key elite, who is actually able to deflect Jack's attacks and can only be defeated with proper timing. As Jack battles the formidable elites, the architect talks about how the mainframe of the repository will be long gone by now, but a backup archive is still out there somewhere. Zoe comes over the radio again to say that she's still putting out distress signals and calls for help, but she's still not getting any responses. She valiantly says she doesn't care though, and that she's going to help Jack until the bitter end, and Jack is much obliged. However, as Jack works his way through more of the city, the architect tells him that he keeps displaying aberrant behavior and doesn't understand why Jack keeps wanting to help Zoe, saying that he wasn't designed to feel things like empathy or gratitude. Jack doesn't respond and continues fighting more keys until Zoe points out just how strangely quiet the city is. Jack mentions that she herself said there was a curfew in place, but Zoe explains that in the base district after lights out you can still hear machinery and turbines working, but up here there's none of that. Funnily enough though, if Jack walks up to some of the doors in the city, he can sometimes hear tenants on the other side reacting to his presence, so the place isn't completely dead. As Jack battles more keys, Zoe radios again to point out that he doesn't talk very much, but it's still good to hear his voice after trying to get him working for an entire year, and Jack is once again obliged. The architect is not, and spouts some Sigma male Instagram page talk about how words dull ideas and a mind as sharp as a blade has little to gain from idle chatter, whatever. After walking across a pipe, Jack finds a new audio log in which the voice of Adam Hamada can be heard talking of an unknown project of his where a group of quote-unquote versions are exhibiting severe mental instabilities. It seems like he's trying to create something alive, but I'm not sure if he's referring to the Ghostrunners, since he mentions them in this audio log as well, and he says that they're working just fine. He also mentions that his then wife Mara has some concerns about this unspecified project, but the log ends with him saying that the two will persist anyway. And nearby, Jack finds a new artifact as well, a bunch of Legos with a description that explains that the first generation of children born in Dharma Tower were given these little building building blocks to normalize the new status quo, and that a tower shape was most prevalent amongst the little architects. Monkey see, monkey do. After Jack collects the Lego bricks, Zoe ponders where exactly everyone is and suspects that everyone willing to fight Mara has already been killed, to which Jack agrees and adds that it's either that or they joined her. As Jack eliminates more keys, the architect perceptively says that they're pathetic, they aren't soldiers or even basic security guards, they're just thugs and bandits, and it's a wonder Mara's patchwork police state has held out this long. As Jack keeps moving, Zoe talks about how, as we know, in the old days during the architect's reign, there were exams that would permit people from the base district to move to Dharma City, and wonders if she would have passed as an engineer. Jack encouragingly says he believes she would have, but the piece of whole architect says, judging by the crappy job she did on your arm, not in 100 years. Man, I can't wait to kill this. After battling more groups of keys, Jack soon meets a new enemy, a key sniper who uses a high-powered rifle with a laser attachment to track his aim. After dispatching the snipers, Jack finds another artifact, an entire Atma chip with a description that explains Atma chips work by establishing connections between a user's brain and heavy machinery, bionic limbs, etc. In another rare instance of him starting a conversation, Jack asks the architect why he was programmed to use a sword instead of guns, and the architect explains that it was to minimize collateral damage and Jack can make do just fine with what he has. But Jack counters by saying the architect's never been in a fight, so how could he know? If you haven't played Ghostrunner, I'll tell you that it can be pretty difficult and frustrating sometimes, and it's funny here because it's almost like Jack is acknowledging that he's dying a lot and this isn't easy for him. As Jack keeps moving, the architect criticizes Mara's regime for their lack of scientific progress and her soldiers' crude weaponry, saying that it's bound to fall to rebels in a decade or two anyway, and Zoe warns Jack of some kind of strange disturbance near the backup repository terminal that's jamming surveillance systems. Apparently it's not that important though, since after mentioning that, she goes right back to wondering about what the outside world must have been like, saying nobody's been outside of Dharma Tower since the gates closed over 100 years ago. After using a jump uplink, Jack finds another artifact, a badge displaying the Keymaster insignia with a description explaining that these badges are mostly only seen in Dharma City, since in the base district, Keymaster guards have essentially nothing in the way of chain of command and are little more than basic gangs. After Jack finds the badge, Zoe tells him that the disturbance has now moved away from the repository terminal, but now the terminal is guarded by keys. After taking care of the keys guarding the terminal, Jack enters it and rolls his metaphorical eyes at the sight of another mind-bending cyber void environment. The architect gives his spiel about how the information here is anything but public knowledge, and Jack starts making his way through the place, listening to the architect explain that the Ghostrunner project began as a military contract, but ended up becoming something far bigger to Adam and his wife Mara. It's interesting to note that the architect doesn't seem to want to acknowledge that Mara was once his wife, and gets a little squirrely about the subject sometimes, which I get. I mean, I'm assuming she was just a normal lady when he married her before she became Doc Ock's copyright-dodging distant cousin. When Jack reaches the end of the cyber void and steps back out into the city, he sees a very unusual sight, a robotic ninja lady who flies off with the data from the repository. Alright, so there's a bit of time before it's explained who exactly this robot lady is, but just so I don't have to keep saying robot lady over and over again, I'll just tell you now. The robot lady's name is Hel, spelled H-E-L, and she is Mara's answer to the architect's Ghostrunner program. Hel is basically a cybernetic clone created in Mara's own image, which is just a hilariously self-masturbatory thing to do and is very much in line with her character. The architect tells Jack to give chase, and Zoe realizes that Hel was the cause of the interference, so she uses that to track Hel's movements as she tries to escape from Jack. The architect gripes about how Mara has ruined a perfect design and that Hel is merely a cheap copy of Jack, since Hel is still easily detectable due to the interference she gives off to surveillance systems. The architect explains that the reason why Ghostrunners are called Ghostrunners is because they are completely undetectable to any surveillance systems, no image, no interference, nothing, and that's why Jack hasn't been fighting Mara's army all at once. I guess that's actually a pretty decent in-universe explanation for that. I always like when games try to actually explain away certain things that you'd usually just ignore because it's a video game, so bonus points for that. As Jack rushes after Hel, Zoe says that she's getting away and Jack won't make it in time before Hel gets back to Mara. Jack asks Zoe for a shortcut cut and she says that there's a train station nearby that'll help him close the distance. Jack channels his inner Uncharted, hopping onto a speeding train and working his way to the front, battling keys every step of the way, and eventually finds another artifact, a counterfeit access card with a description explaining that these cards are often used by smugglers who need to move contraband throughout Dharma Tower without having to bribe any of the Keymaster's troops. As Jack keeps moving along the train, the architect tells him to hurry up, saying that the data Hell has is vital for them to stand a chance against Mara, and Jack keeps battling keys and dodging signs until he eventually catches up. Surprisingly, Hell actually speaks and gives a little robotic greeting to Jack, realizing that he has no kill switch, so she asks somebody for permission to engage. And for the first time ever, we hear the voice of Mara herself, who radios to grant Hell permission to engage, and the battle begins. And that's about how it goes for a little bit. Jack and Hell fight each other like neglected siblings caught up in their parents' messy divorce, with mommy and daddy barking orders in their ears and yelling at each other that it's all their fault. But Hell is still nowhere near as hard as Tom was, and it doesn't take long for Jack to defeat her, and he chops her head off. Jesus, was that necessary? Oh, good lord. Jack does some kind of robot force thing with her severed head and actually uses it to enter the cyber void again, where he learns a new ranged ability that the architect says will assist them in the battle against Mara. When Jack leaves the cyber void and finishes up with his little Ed Kemper routine, Zoe comes over the radio with the realization that Hell was actually involved in the final battle against the Climbers, making reference to the events of the Project Hell DLC. Yeah, there is a DLC for this game, and it supposedly sees you take control of Hell, but spoiler alert, you don't actually play as this Hell, you play as her big sister, who is far more interesting and funny than the Hell Jack actually fights in-game. But that means the DLC basically gives no additional significance to the in-game Hell fight because they're two completely different people. Anyway, that's a whole other story. Hell was fun, but she's pushing up cyber void daisies now, so the architect tells Jack it's time to really get this show on the road. After he takes another lift to ascend even higher and reach what looks to be some kind of industrial sector of Dharma City, Jack is warned by Zoe that he's getting closer to the core where Mara is hiding and that security here will be even tighter than usual. The architect explains that the turrets near the core have far more advanced sensors than the standard surveillance systems from before, meaning his Ghostrunner automatic camouflage will be useless against them. After destroying a turret, Jack finds a new audio log in which Adam talks of making progress on an unnamed project where he's having conversations with himself. So I guess the earlier audio log in which the iterations were experiencing mental instabilities was in reference to the Architect project, where Adam was trying to make AI copies of himself to achieve pseudo-immortality. However, it seems some of the architects are being rebellious, and the log ends with Adam mentioning one of the newer versions trying to take over the cyber void, resulting in him getting deactivated. As Jack navigates past more turrets, Zoe tries to have another little heart-to-heart with him and thank him for being a good person, but Jack basically says he's no hero, he's just a robot. Jack soon finds another new artifact, a bottle of alcohol, with a description that talks of its extreme rarity in Dharma Tower and theorizes that it must have belonged to some rich big business guy. As Jack keeps moving, the architect explains that the core used to house Dharma Tower's administrative and technological centers, but now it's a dump, and he says it's painful to see his city in such a state of ruin, but he's learned his lesson. Jack asks the architect how he's able to remember the coup if he technically wasn't there, and interestingly, the architect refers to himself in the third person, separating himself as the architect AI from the once human Adam Hamada. As Jack battles more keys, Zoe explains that he's currently in the Dharma City exclusion zone, saying that no civilians are allowed beyond this point, and all that leaves it are rumors about Mara's vast laboratories where she experiments on people and does all kinds of evil supervillain stuff. After Jack destroys some more turrets, he soon finds another artifact, a pair of old broken eyeglasses, with a description explaining that in the world of Ghostrunner, artificial eyes are a catch-all problem for any optical issues a person may have, so these glasses being found here means they must have belonged to someone rich making a fashion statement or someone just being sentimental about the old world. And soon after killing a couple more keys, Jack finds a pretty interesting artifact, a broken sword that once belonged to a Ghostrunner just like him, with a description explaining that Ghostrunners are each given their own specialized swords, but the owner of this sword is most likely long dead. Zoe again says she appreciates Jack's help with all this uprising business and talks about how her and her buddies would have never been able to make it this far even if they did survive the massacre, adding that if Jack succeeds then none of the climbers' deaths will have been in vain. Jack tells her don't worry about it, and as he's navigating some more treacherous turrets he hears the architect give a strange quick speech about how desperate people become violent and dangerous, and Mara lacks the subtlety that he has when it comes to dealing with other human beings. Wow, he talks about people like they're just problems to be dealt with. He's a politician, alright. Soon, Jack finds himself in a large room with electricity hazards, and the architect explains that he's now approaching one of the oldest parts of Dharma Tower that used to be his place of oversight before he was betrayed by Mara. As Jack keeps moving, he hears Zoe come over the radio with some big news. She just got a distress signal on a secret frequency used only by the climbers. Jack suspects it's a trap of some kind, but Zoe says she's tired of just sitting around while Jack does all the work and can't let someone who might need help go ignored. She says she's leaving, and Jack tries to tell her to stay and that he needs her. Yes, please, we do need you. Don't go. Do not leave me alone with this idiot. Zoe tells him that's flattering, but he doesn't need her help and thanks him again one last time before signing off and going out to look for the sender of the distress signal. And the architect, being the he is, says that Zoe probably won't survive, and if Jack and him can't defeat Mara, then nobody will. The architect says that he's prepared to not only take out Mara, but also clean up the mess she's made of Dharma Tower, claiming that saving humanity will require strength and unity. Okay, can you do it without being a Jack soon finds another elevator that he uses to ascend to Mara's laboratory complex, listening to the architect explain that Mara had little care for the history and culture of Earth and instead only prioritized her own scientific research. So when she led the coup and the tower fell apart, she hid away in her laboratories. Jack asks the architect what Mara's goal was in all this, and the architect ominously says that she wanted to alter humanity, and Jack's about to see her work firsthand. The tone shifts drastically as the music quiets and Jack watches some unknown creature scurry past him. There's blood all over the place and strange indiscernible shapes suspended in giant glass vats full of green liquid. This place reminds me of the storage rooms at a certain local food store that I used to work at. As Jack is jumping through a fan, he hears the intercom proclaiming that Mara is preparing to address the residents of Dharma Tower in a special announcement. The architect points out how peculiar this is, since Mara isn't much of a leader and has barely said a word this entire time, so she's probably preparing for something big. After dropping down onto a platform, Jack finds a new artifact, an old handheld video game console with a description explaining that they were popular in the old world before being replaced by virtual reality, and the ones that still work after all this time are very valuable even if nobody makes any new games for them. Over the announcement system, Mara says hello to the people of Dharma Tower and that it's been a long time, naively assuming that they've forgotten about the lady who made everything suck, and explains that she's here to save them and that the outside world is harsh and unforgiving, but humanity can't stay in the tower forever. Mara believes that instead of altering the outside world, they should alter themselves, and then Jack comes face to face with her solution. These horrifying things, referred to as spiders in the game files, believe it or not, used to be human beings and have been genetically modified and spliced with machinery to the point where they're completely unrecognizable. Apparently, however, they don't need to breathe, which means they can survive outside of Dharma Tower. Nice job, Mara, you saved the human race. The architect does a quick little analysis and finds that these hybrid spider things don't even have brains, which is probably the only feature of theirs us ordinary humans have in common with them. During combat, spiders simply run towards Jack and explode when they get close enough, and Jack has no choice but to simply avoid them until they put themselves out of their misery. Mara keeps talking over the intercom about how machinery has gotten them this far, but they need to take it even deeper into themselves in order to complete the next step of human evolution. Soon after meeting the spiders, Jack finds another artifact, an old laptop that once belonged to a Samsara Corporation employee, with a description explaining that computers this big are quite rare now since most electronic devices have built-in microchips. Mara continues to spout nonsense about walking under the sky once more, and while it's tempting to imagine how much fun it would be to live as an exploding spider mutant, Jack doesn't seem to be sold on the idea and keeps moving until he finds another artifact. A very expensive old book, a collection of Charles Darwin's groundbreaking works with a description that explains it has a dedication inside that reads, "Perfection needs not evolve. Stay forever just the way you are, M. From Adam." Aw, the sociopathic dictators are in love. How adorable. To be honest though, geez, maybe Adam the human wasn't really that bad of a guy before he died. The architect's a jerk for certain, but they're technically not the same. I'm not really sure. Continuing through the laboratories, Jack finds one of the last remaining auxiliary cybervoid terminals that the architect points out Mara must have never been able to locate. Entering the cybervoid, the architect explains that here Jack will learn one of the most powerful abilities afforded to only the most special Ghostrunners, to which Jack asks where he fell on the pecking order of him and his brothers. The architect tells Jack that he never had any special abilities, he was simply made as an ordinary Ghostrunner, and Jack asks another question about who he was before he became a Ghostrunner in the first place. In a rather poignant moment, Jack learns that he actually never even was born. Each biological cell of his was engineered and grafted together with cybernetics to create him. Even though he bleeds and feels, Jack finally realizes that he really was made to be nothing more than the sword in his hand, and listens to the architect explain that the new ability he'll learn here is how to hack Atma chips, the brain implants within nearly all Dharma City residents, meaning he'll essentially be able to hack people themselves. Jack is appalled by this and for the first time outright accuses the architect of being a horrible person, saying that he's even worse than Mara, since Mara only sabotaged the Ghostrunners while the architect did it to everyone. Yeah, the architect's a jerk, but worse than Mara? I don't know, man, that might be a closer race than the developers intended it to be. After Jack masters the art of Overlord and exits the cyber void, he hears Mara continuing her speech to the people of Dharma Tower, trying to convince them that any rebels of her cause are traitors to the human race. Jack battles more and more keys, continuing through the laboratories, and hears Mara keep blabbering about how the time has come, the key is turning, and now is the time to live as a disgusting, horrible, exploding spider thing. After making his way to a large rectangular room, Jack is soon introduced to a very unusual new enemy who's clearly far less human than the keys from before, a special mutant hybrid called a shifter who fights using a limited form of teleportation and ranged projectile attacks. As he fights them, the intercom announces that mandatory augmentation will take place in an hour, and all Dharma City residents are to report to their nearest key guard station to await further instructions. Oh god, it's happening. After defeating the shifters, Jack soon finds another audio log in which Adam Hamada exclaims in victory that he's finally achieved the impossible and cloned himself as a fully sentient AI. In another jarring instance of Adam actually seeming to care about his then wife, he says that he can't wait for Mara to meet his creation, to which the architect eerily asks that he be given a physical body to better interact in social situations, and the log ends with him confidently saying that he's sure Mara is going to like him. After listening to the audio log, Jack keeps moving and is for once encouraged by the architect, who rightfully says that Mara's creations are no longer human and this has gone on long enough. Jack finds another elevator and uses it to ascend to the heart of the Dharma Laboratories, which the architect explains used to house the most brilliant scientists from around the world since even before the burst, saying that they couldn't save all of humanity, but they could save the very best of them. The place is literally crawling with tons of spider hybrids, and the architect recoils in horror at them once again, reassuring Jack that at this point killing these things is more merciful to them than letting them live. And yeah, that's correct, these things... can they even wipe their butts? After taking a zipline, Jack finds a new artifact, a monitoring device called a radio collar, with the description explaining that the Keymaster would have these put on unruly subjects of hers when they needed to be controlled while also being allowed to perform their assigned duties. Yikes. After Jack takes out some more keys, the architect, sounding unusually humanitarian for once, mourns the loss of all this life and says that each one of them could have contributed to humanity's redemption, saying that everyone is an instrument of something greater. Yeah, well, that's what Zoe was trying to do and you told her to go pound sand, so what do you really want, bro? In a large open area, Jack finds another artifact, a bunch of old postcards showing a time long past, with a description that explains that the most ancient artifacts within Dharma Tower date back to a time when not only the Earth's sky was blue, but also its oceans. After Jack eliminates a large group of keys and mechs, Mara herself directly addresses the architect in a revealing speech where she refers to Jack as the architect's puppet and tells the architect in her delusion that humanity is ready to venture back out into the world. The architect wisely says that if this is what's considered progress, then we should have never evolved from monkey, and I couldn't agree more. Soon afterwards, Jack meets another new disturbing looking hybrid enemy called a splitter that obscures its true self by generating holographic decoys during combat. The architect observes that the minds of these hybrids are even more disfigured than their bodies and says that the human mind cannot survive for long in a body so far removed from its original form. Jack then asks the architect what about his mind, but the architect doesn't respond. Mara comes over the intercom again to ask the architect if he really believes he's Adam and tells him that he is an abomination that Adam came to fear before he died, and the architect corrects her by saying before she killed him. Mara gives the architect a pretty damn hypocritical speech about how he doesn't have a shred of conscience or a soul, and Jack ignores their bickering, continuing through the laboratories until he finds one last audio log, in which a drunken Adam Hamada seems to have completely lost his mind. He's become disturbed by what he calls the inhumanity of the architect and Mara as well, saying he has suspicions about them both wanting to kill him and that he's 100 years old now and he's just tired of everything. And the log suddenly ends with him saying he does not care. After Jack battles another group of keys and robots, he asks the architect if all that stuff Mara said was true, but the architect tells him no and that Adam only feared death, not him. As Jack keeps moving, Mara asks the architect why he would have protected Sector 5 instead of going directly to her, and rightly concludes that the architect must not be in complete control of Jack. In response, the architect puts her on mute and tells Jack that she's just trying to sidetrack him, and eventually Jack finds another artifact, an artificial eyeball with a description explaining that it's made to allow increased hand-eye coordination and reflexes, and that these types of eyes are sometimes used by mid-tier Keymaster forces. After Jack deals with some more enemies, he questions the architect again and tells him that he's not Adam and he shouldn't keep masquerading as him, but the architect responds that he is the one true Adam Hamada reincarnated, but Jack says it's not that simple, and the architect tells him that he's starting to sound like Mara. Mara comes over the intercom again to berate the architect, telling him to stop putting her on mute so Jack can listen, and she tries to say something about how the Ghostrunners were just made to be slaves to Adam before the architect mutes her once again, upsetting Jack, who now knows that he's been lied to more than once by both of these idiots. The architect tells him to take it easy and that once they take care of Mara, everything will make sense, and Jack hops onto an elevator to ascend to the laboratory's highest level. Stepping out of the elevator, Jack listens to the architect divulge a bit of information about himself, or maybe Adam, I'm not really sure, which is something he doesn't usually do, sharing that before the burst he oversaw the Samsara Corporation before being assigned to supervise Dharma Tower. He says his office is just around the corner actually, and that Jack was created here at his private workshop. Jack again asks the architect who he is and gets the same answer he's gotten since the beginning, an answer to the question of what he is as opposed to who. Mara then makes another announcement telling Jack and the architect that their time has run out and soon the people of Dharma Tower will no longer be dependent on this quote-unquote prison. Humanity's future is outside and she will happily have everyone else pay the price to secure it on her behalf. It doesn't take long for Jack to make his way through the last few sections of the laboratory, however, and after he catches sight of Mara, he hops on over, and 20 years later, it's time for round 2. The architect quite astutely tells Jack he needs to focus and that Mara's no pushover, and he's definitely correct. Not only does she have, the 6 octopus robot arms, Mara herself is gigantic. She's gotta be like 7 feet tall and she's strong as shit. When Jack disables one of her arms, she'll just break it off and toss it to the side. However, most of the fight is just her and Jack playing jump rope together, and if it weren't for her trying to constantly stab, swipe, smash, or zap Jack, this would just be an adorable moment between Cyborg, mother, and son. But it's not. Mara really wants to kill Jack, and Jack really wants to kill her, and after a difficult but short fight, Jack is victorious and Mara dies. Well, that wasn't so bad. Gee, I guess it's
Congratulations. You fulfilled your purpose. We can now proceed to the next stage of my plan. Allow me to do the honors.
Ah, yes, how could we forget? Pulling Jack into the cyber void one last time, the architect finally reveals himself to be the psycho-evil guy we already knew he was because he's been a complete jerk since like level 1. But anyway, the architect tells GR74 not to struggle and that he needs his body but not the rest of him. Up until now, the architect was too weak to take control of Jack, too fractured, and the rebels had changed Jack to be independent. But now that Jack's defeated Mara and linked all of the cyber void terminals, the architect is stronger than ever, and he wants to take complete control over Jack and use him as the physical body he was never given. Here in the cyber void, a giant wall stretching as far as the horizon threatens to kill Jack, who's now completely on his own with no disembodied voices to support him whatsoever. The architect says that under his rule, Dharma Tower will be unified once more, and all will bow to his every whim, staying within the tower forever. As Jack navigates each treacherous hazard of this dark and cold cyber void that was created not to have him learn but to have him die, he realizes that this must have been why Mara killed Adam and that this was his plan. The architect confirms this, continuing to denounce Jack, telling him that he's imperfect, and now that he's served his purpose as an instrument of his will, it's time for him to become the first member of the new order of things. At one point, he even asks Jack why he's being so selfish and that this is the best way for him to serve his fellow people. So come on, just roll over and die, buddy. Trust me, it's for humanity, bro. He says that the rebels ruined him, turned a work of art into a piece of junk driven by an illusion of sentience and desire to survive. And Jack just hits him with the verbal equivalent of a middle finger. Eventually, Jack surpasses the architect's death trap and confronts him at the top of the cyber void at the top of Dharma Tower. The architect pleads with him, telling Jack that if he kills him, the cyber void will shut down, disabling Jack's central operating systems and consequently killing him as well. The architect defiantly states he will not be killed by a faulty machine, a malfunctioning computer, a mere tool, and the tool corrects him, saying,
"My name is Jack."
And that, everybody, was the tremendous tale of Ghostrunner. In the brief time he was alive, our hero Jack, with the help of his climber pal Zoe, ascended to the top of Dharma Tower to defeat both his tyrannical parents and sacrifice himself for the one person who ever bothered to treat him like something other than a machine made to serve. A short but charming story about a robot who ended up having more humanity than the humans who created him. And if you thought this game was good, just wait till you see Ghostrunner 2.